Kia ora, everyone. My name is Andrew Cowie. Welcome to our webinar, Navigating Age, Stage, and Readiness of Young People in Online Spaces. Our webinar today is being brought to you by Netsafe and the Classification Office. So we have myself and two other speakers with us today who I will introduce in a moment. We will kick off today first with a karakia. Mate whakapono, mate tumanako, mate titiro, mate whakarongo, mate mahi tahi, mate mana wanui, mate aroha, ka taya e o. Kia ora, everyone. We're really happy to have you with us today. Our audience today is, we're expecting to have parents, caregivers, whānau, teachers, educators, school leaders, anyone who works with young people, which is quite a wide audience for us. So we're really excited to have you with us today. We just want to explain to you how today is going to work. We have David Shanks from the Classification Officer, the Chief Censor, here to join us. And we also have Angie Webster, who is one of the education advisors with the education team at Netsafe. I'll just tell you a little bit about Netsafe before we give a proper introduction to our two other speakers. So Netsafe, our purpose is to enable people to access digital opportunities and confidently reduce online harm. And we have some ways that you can get in touch with us. We have a contact center where you can enter a web form. You can go into the 0508 number, free text Netsafe to 4282. This is if someone you or someone you know has been harmed online. And then we have a general questions or inquiries that are more related to education, presentations, workshops, support that we can give your school to the education@netsafe.org.nz email. As well, with today's event, we want to invite people to add their comments and questions while we're during this broadcast. There's a couple ways you can do that. If you are logged into YouTube, you can ask a comment or make a comment or ask a question directly onto YouTube. And we will share those about halfway through. We'll stop around 4 o'clock and share some of those. Or you can send an email as well to the education@netsafe.org.nz and just put webinar in the subject line. We'll be checking that regularly throughout the broadcast, and we will then share them as well. Now, just so everyone is aware that once this webinar is complete, we will be sending out a summary of some of the key points and messages from today's webinar. So if you're joining us today after signing up through Eventbrite and your email is included, then we will send you this takeaway document so that you have for review and to share with colleagues once we're completed today's webinar. So we're really looking forward to an interesting and a robust conversation with a couple of experts today. So I will properly introduce them and let them introduce themselves. In fact, on the education team, we have Angie Webster, who's joining us from Wellington. And Angie, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, so I've been in education for many, many years. I've taught in Auckland, Hawke's Bay and Wellington, and had the pleasure and privilege in teaching across all levels during that time. So from early childhood, primary, intermediate, and a wee time in secondary. So that's really been helpful and developed an interest and an investment and curiosity about, age and stage and, just what's happening for young people across what we would call, early childhood into tweens and teens. So during that time, I became really interested while in the classroom, and as things on digital technology platforms evolved and social media sites started to crop up, and just seeing what students I was teaching in a years 1 to 8 school were doing in those spaces, as well as our teenage daughters at that time. So it led me to down a journey to do my master's and research in this space, the complexities for schools, for whānau and young people around navigating the challenges and complexities that can crop up So it's been a fascinating journey, and in that time I have also worked full-time with Netsafe, and then actually now partnering both with Netsafe hat on, which is fabulous, and with Generation Online. And in that role, I work in schools and other organisations, and have partnered with cybersecurity organisation, the Light Project, and other work streams, which has been tremendous, and has really broadened my experience and insights and knowledge around the space, and how it continues to become more and more challenging while also really fun as well.
Nice to have you with us, Angie. Thank you. David Shanks, Chief Censor at the Classification Office, also coming to us from Wellington, with a more exciting backdrop than both Angie and I have ourselves. So, David, welcome.
Kia ora, Andrew. It's great to be here to talk about this this really important and relevant topic. Look, as Chief Censor, I'm a media regulator with a responsibility to keep people in Aotearoa safe from harms that may come from consuming various types of content, which is a challenging proposition in this day and age. I'm sure you'll agree, and as we'll get a chance to talk about. Look, in terms of my background, I trained as a lawyer and operated in private and public sector for many years, and then had general leadership roles in the public service, including leading policy teams and the like. I've also, in fairly recent history, been the director of a tech company, a tech software startup, and I'm a father. I have 3 children, 17, 14, and 8 years of age. So I've got a really good sample spread of children and young people to draw on as I think about navigating this space. I was also, in my younger days in particular, a really avid consumer of science fiction. And I've always been interested in the future and what the future may hold. So I guess I would say in this role, there's an opportunity to bring together legal aspects of my background, my interest in leadership and policy, my interest as a parent, and meld that together with thinking about the challenges of the future, because the future is now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say we're all wearing a parent hat here today to some extent. And I think the more time that we spend, especially with home learning, those conversations between parents, found out caregivers, and teachers, and our young people, those have to be ongoing. And today's an opportunity for us to, what can we do with the deluge and the volume of content available online, and the vast array of what's available to young people, both what they access on purpose and what they access by accident, and everything in between. It's a really crucial thing. So I just want to bring it up at this stage around structure of our conversation today. We're going to signpost the conversation with some key questions, and we will share those key questions in the video, and that will guide us through. And both Angie and David will be adding their thoughts to those questions. And just remember, we will be providing a document with the key points, summarizing points of their comments. So just again, before we kick off, reminder again, if you have comments, you have questions you want to add them to the comments in YouTube or the education email, education@netsafe.org.nz. Okay, let's get right into it. Navigating age and stage. What does that mean? What does it mean to navigate age and stage when it comes to engaging with content? Angie, over to you.
Yeah, this is it's such a big topic, isn't it? And when we think about young people, we're talking about under 5s, those who are in primary school, intermediate age, and then into high school. It covers a huge range of interest stages, ages. And I like to think around, when we talk about age and stage, for me personally, that age is speaking to, a mark that we measure on how long, someone's been here. And while it's a given age, the stages of maturity, the needs, and what's going on for children and teens is quite personal, although we know that there are developmental aspects that are typical of ages. And so they give us, rough measures of how someone is doing. And thinking about age, we've got the cognitive development, social and emotional development that's taking place. I'm just thinking, just around their bodies are growing in different rates and stages. And it becomes very interesting too in that tween stage and teen stage where hormones become a huge factor in the cognitive, social, emotional and physiological development of young people. Thinking about stage though, and I think, those who have been around young people or have raised children, same household, same gene pool, but very, very different. No two are alike. And so knowing, as a parent, each child is very, very individual and their experiences are individual, and what, might be exciting and thrilling for one, could be really scary, could be upsetting, concerning, or just they don't get it, for another one. And so we do need to think about our children, those we're working with, those in our home as individuals, alongside also, when we think about age and we think about restrictions or requirements on the sorts of platforms they may be on, the media they're consuming, etc. Parents will know their children best, and they aren't all alike. Just thinking too in regard to that about age and stage. The research that I've read talks about much younger children, can be really, really triggered and upset by things that we may not even realise because they don't necessarily understand, CGI, and where, for example, animals are hurt or killed, or there's violence between people on screen that's unexpected. Those kinds of things can be really, really upsetting for much younger children. Sometimes I think when we start a topic like this, possibly the assumption is we jump to pornography as being sort of like the inappropriate, but actually there's other sorts of things. I was just thinking about recently in a school doing a parent night, and often parents will come up and chat afterwards, and a mum came to me and said about her 6-year-old son had come to her and talked to her about that he'd been on this game, quite innocuous, something that was okay for him to be on, and something had popped up, and whatever it was, the suddenness, all over the screen as it popped up, and then the expression, and it was some kind of creepy character, and it really disturbed him. And he did all the right things. He went and told mum, and they talked about it and that, but she was really surprised just about those sensitivities about her son in that regard. So those are sorts of examples when we're thinking about younger children. I'm just thinking too around age and stage, just anecdotally, different schools I've worked in, when I'm working with groups of children, I'm thinking in a lot of year 3 and 4 classes, where I might just say, hey, what are you doing online? What are you enjoying? And just open up the conversation positively. And quite a number talk about being on GTA 5, which is Grand Theft Auto 5, computer game. And I know David will probably talk about these things a bit more because it's classified here in New Zealand for 18 and over. But we're talking about 7 and 8-year-olds being in those spaces. They're often talking about this on TikTok, using Snapchat, on Fortnite, and they are much younger children. So they're in spaces where they are mixing with teens and adults. They are seeing media that is being designed for those older audiences, and the themes that can run in those adult themes, can be really, really something where the cognitive, social, and emotional stages of younger children is not there. They're not ready. They don't have the processing capabilities.
That's it. Yeah, and I'd say just to bring David into this as well around the role of the Chief Censor, because of course I've got a whole drawer full over by the TV, which is full of DVDs and Blu-rays and, well, really technology of yesterday, Xbox games, but they all had clear ratings on the cover of them. But of course there aren't covers to online spaces necessarily. It's not like kids are jumping onto a website and going, well, let me just go check the rating on this before I jump on. That just doesn't really happen. So it's like this vigilance to need to be even more mindful about it is even more important. David, can you explain how your role as Chief Censor plays into this, given the kind of the multitude of spaces that we're now in?
Yeah, well, look, I can try, Andrew. But that DVD age, I mean, wasn't that great? Wasn't that a beautiful thing when you had an artifact and you had labels on it and you knew what you were dealing with? And that's a bygone era. Doesn't seem that long ago to me, but actually that's rapidly receding into the rear vision mirror, and we're in a whole new phase now that we need to engage with. I mean, just in terms of thinking about the structures and frameworks that were in place to keep children and young people safe and to help parents back in the day compared to now. We had broadcasting systems and guidance, which meant that we had watersheds on broadcast television, which meant that certain types of content was only screened after 6:30 and then after 8:30. And then if something was really potentially raunchy or controversial or problematic or harmful, it might be after 9:30. And films and VHS tapes and then DVDs were also, if they were potentially to be restricted, were all classified and reviewed by my office, by the classification office. And age restrictions were put on them as well as warning notes. Fantastic, far from perfect even then, but relatively straightforward and understood and clear. That obviously is not the case now. We still classify films and the occasional DVD and games, but really we are dealing with and only can deal with a very tiny percentage of the content that's available through digital platforms and social media. And that creates a challenging space. I mean, it's interesting to reflect on the fact that many of the apps that our children engage with have nominally a 13 age restriction for signing up. And interestingly, some people might be interested to know why is that? Well, there's a piece of US regulation called the COPPA, which is the Child Online Privacy Protection Act, which I think is a very old act. It's probably getting on for 30 years old, which maintains some protections around accessing and capturing data from children under 13 years of age. So social media platforms and digital platforms will put up a label going, "Are you over 13?" Tick yes, great, or maybe enter your date of birth, which kids, of course, all know how to circumvent and cut through. So the normal frameworks and safeguards that used to be in place no longer apply, and we're working on that as regulators and systems around the world. In fact, we've just brought in a new system for ensuring that classifications on streaming services like Netflix or Amazon or Neon have consistent, the sort of consistent labeling and warnings that you might expect to see on a DVD. But that's just a start, and it goes nowhere far enough in terms of what parents are looking for and what children and young people really need. I think increasingly it is about understanding that for parents, it's an engagement process. Children these days, average age of getting a smartphone is around about 11 and going down year on year. Access to digital devices is common from earlier ages. And in my personal experience, you can parent up to a point in terms of monitoring, putting in safeguards, parental locks, etc., up to a certain age, at a point where your child becomes more digitally savvy than you are. In my case, with my oldest son, that was when he turned around 12 and he built his own gaming supercomputer, and it was like, well, at this point, I'm not managing his access to information, I'm negotiating with him what information there is. So, I think we'll talk some more about kind of what that means and looks like. But I think there's some good principles around ensuring that, there is some level of age appropriateness for and protection for children, bearing in mind what Ange said, which is, look, not all kids are the same, and kids will be impacted by different content in different ways. And to some extent, there's an opportunity there in understanding your child and engaging with them to get a sense of that and doing what you can do to keep them safe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so much of digital literacy, digital citizenship does require a discussion around solutions that actually aren't tech-based. They're acknowledging that the technology has become much more complex. Not only in that we haven't got an artifact, as you said, David, to point to that kind of gives you some guardrails, but not only were they able to go online into websites that could be very far and wide, a real wilderness. But then there's also the invisible forces around algorithms and the way that whole architecture has been set up. And I think part of all of us as parents, guardians, and teachers and young people, we all need to be aware that these forces are at work. And part of being a good digital citizen is understanding that those forces are at work, and they don't necessarily have our best interest at heart, right? So that leads us into our next guiding question, really, which is, what do we need to think about when it comes to algorithms? What do we need to consider as far as their impact and the way that their design has its effect and its reach? Ange, did you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I think from, when we think about the platforms, the way that media can be consumed, there's no argument about the fact it's compelling. It's really compelling for young people. It's stimulating. They love being on, they love being in there, and they love watching. Very, very visual, these days. However, from the point of view around, development and age and stage readiness, when we think about the fact that everything has been designed by people, every Snapchat, Netflix, any online, anything is being designed, and ideally they want us on there as long as possible. And there's a whole host of reasons for that. Part of it is word of mouth. It's a popular game. It's a space to be, reputation, and of course profit. And so keeping us on as long as possible. They have in turn built many different functions. So knowing that, we have all these different age groups very interested in some of these platforms that come with an age requirement or an age restriction in terms of a legal status, it's pretty difficult when, just simply thinking around, what are some of those functions. So the idea that you can respawn, I'm thinking Fortnite here, you can respawn into the game sort of, in 2 or 3 minutes. So you're back in the action quickly. Just things like status, earning, just through the competitive nature of a game, the more you achieve, therefore the more you're able to show that sort of strength and capability as your character in game. So there's status and elevation. Just the pace at which games move, and it's all done with high sort of psychological design into them. The music, the sound effects. If we think social media platforms, and we're thinking what's built into those to make it exciting and engaging, we've got capabilities to share image, video, emojis, titles, special effects. And the social component in those spaces as well is huge. And so with all of this, when a young person or an adult or whoever gets on, there's a whole chemical cocktail that takes place because of this design. And we might experience adrenaline and be in a rush in the game, and that's staying quite high, those levels. Thinking of serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine, various chemicals that have really interesting effects and that they make us feel good. We're enjoying ourselves. we're connecting, we feel valued. So with all of this happening in those spaces, because they've been designed to keep us in as long as possible, it can have, quite an influence and effect on younger people who aren't necessarily ready to sustain for long periods of time that they might be even online and in these spaces. So that can be a concern and something to really watch. And of course, balance, is everything. So that's part of the design element that's really important. And then there's algorithms and, how they're designed to, take us down a pathway with content, because we've looked at something, for a little while, we get fed that. It's been an interesting thing being on TikTok and taking my time scrolling through slowly just out of interest with the platform, and it reads, all about me. Gets a sense of, gender and age bracket, and the sort of stuff it's been feeding me has just been like, I ain't interested in that. I think, David, you want to have a chat about some of those too, because you've got some really neat insights into that.
Yeah, look, I've been thinking about this aspect for a long time. If you're talking about digital platforms like YouTube or TikTok or Instagram, et cetera, you're talking about global platforms with massive reach and massive profits. And what does that translate into? It translates into incredibly huge databases capturing vast amounts of personal information, the most powerful AIs in the world, collating and tracking all of that information, and also the best behavioralists and psychologists in the world are also in the employ of these companies. And what is all of that power brought to bear on? It's brought to bear on capturing and holding your attention for as long as possible. That's what it's all about. That's how these things are monetized. And I'll tell you a brief story about a few years ago. It was a Saturday morning. I'd got up, I was getting myself a coffee, and my son came out of his room and he said, "Dad, have you heard of the GDPR?" And I went, "Well, yes, son, I have. That's the General Data Protection Regulation that's just been launched in the EU." And he said, "Well, because of this GDPR thing, I'm on Steam." Steam was the gaming platform that I think many people would have heard of, if they have kids at this age. I've gone on Steam. They've changed their privacy requirements, and I've got access to this whole new set of data. Come and have a look at this, Dad. And I went into his room, and there was a first-person shooter game happening. They all look pretty largely the same to me. And I said, "Okay, what am I looking at?" He said, "Dad, this is the first game I ever played on Steam 3 years ago. They have captured and recorded every single game I have ever played on this platform, and I can jump to other players, and watch me playing from their perspective. It's all captured on this, data harvest about me." And that got me thinking, right? So this platform is actually recording absolutely every interaction by children playing games on its platform. Why? For profiling. They probably don't even know that they can work through all of that data right now, but they know sometime in the very near future that AI will be powerful enough to pick through all that material, profile and market directly to my child and your child and everyone else's, to make sure they capture every commercial possibility there is. Now, there's a couple of aspects to this for me. One is what you're talking about, Ange, in terms of really, how invasively kind of compelling these platforms can become. The more you engage with them, and the more you engage with them, the more you're giving them their information. And this is a very real thing for children, young people, and all of us. The other thing is the platform AIs are trying to work out what is it that will keep you engaged. And human nature being what it is, the sorts of things that often keeps us engaged are things that aren't necessarily good for us. They are things that arouse strong emotions, maybe anger, maybe hostility, maybe fear. There might be sexual content engagement in there. All of these are fairly primordial kind of pressure point buttons that the platform will explore and figure out how to play, essentially, to ensure that you're engaged as much and as long as possible. And that increases the risk and likelihood and possibility of age inappropriate or harmful content being recommended to children and young people.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, David, that is fascinating, and you're right. And I think something, to add to this too, around, the hugely stimulating, compelling environments that they're in, and then also being fed types of content. I come across, like I say, working in schools, working in different organisations, lots of conversations that different people with different hats on will have. And, there is a lot of high concern, and often the word used about addiction, talking about, oh, they're addicted to their phone, or she's addicted to social media, or he's addicted to gaming. And it's very common to hear that term used. And I just thought it worth mentioning at this point too, that it's important to think around addiction versus compulsion, and actually, addiction being something that really is something that needs to be diagnosed by a professional, and therefore, leaning lightly on that word, because it's a heavy label, it's a heavy word to use, and steering away from that, in the home, and maybe looking more towards, thinking around, compulsion. So they're in these environments that they're just drawn to be in, and it's very hard to leave. And so often, kids are grumpy if they've got to come off a device, or they may be aggressive, all kinds of things, thinking around that whole high response that's going on. And as you said, David, the types of things like maybe, anger and a big investment of emotions going on. And, so that whole balance, the idea of them coming off devices in sort of a self-regulating way by simply saying, I've been on long enough, time to go, time to set the table, put the rubbish out and do my jobs. It's like, it just doesn't happen with many young people. So we've got a role to play. I think we're going to talk about some of these strategies later around that, but just wanted to really point out that idea about, if we think about compulsion versus addiction, with compulsion, it's like a bad habit, and bad habits can be changed. They can be turned around, and new patterns, healthy patterns, can be established. And, that's our more hopeful, more positive avenue to think if we're parenting and are concerned, and just thinking around the language we might be using.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree that the addiction type comparison isn't that. I don't think it's that accurate or that helpful in this space. There's definitely elements of compulsion, but also manipulation, if you really think about what's going on here. But the fact is, this is kind of a battle for attention, and I think every parent senses that when you're trying to reach your child and they are on a digital device or whatever, you are literally arm wrestling with that device or their, to fight for their attention. And I think, it's worth thinking about that, and thinking about how you can start leaning into that challenge.
Yeah. And also, not to say that there aren't young people who may need interventions, with a professional, and that, there may be some, serious aspects to those behaviours that do need help.
Yeah, we really have there's a real long game we're playing here, in one sense, in that just the awareness around all these forces at work, right? So, that we've obviously talked about some very, the whole way that compulsion plays into this. But also, I think just for some parents out there, some caregivers out there, we're thinking, well, what just happens if my son or my daughter are watching something and they click on something, or they open up a new tab, or they go down some rabbit hole, and suddenly they're exposed to content that they really shouldn't have seen. And that's sort of where we want to raise awareness in today's session. But of course, we want to really talk about things that we can think about and do starting now, starting with the way we consider content. And that leads us into our next question, which is, how do we manage those incidents when there is exposure to content that is not suited to that age of the young person? Because we've all been there as educators, as parents, where it's like, oh, I wish I hadn't seen that. It's not a question of if they'll see it, it's when. And it's like, what do we need to do? What do we need to think about in order to make sure that when that happens, we're not being too alarmed, we're not being alarmist about it, we're not reacting, but that we're actually trying to create some really constructive responses rather to something like that. How do you both feel about what we can do when something just pops up, it just flares up on the screen, they've seen it? What do we need to do about that as parents?
Do you want to go?
I'll throw it over to you, David.
Yeah,
And you jump in. Yeah, either one. Yeah.
Look, I mean, this is, this is, as we've been talking about increasingly. There's always been this. There's always been, events throughout throughout all generations where, at some point, child or young person developing, encounters something that really bothers them, really disturbs them, shocks them, upsets them, and to an extent, some level of this is a normal part of growing up. But I think the environment we're in now, when you've got not one screen in the house, but 3 or 6 or 10 or whatever, and the sorts of profiling and kind of directing of particularly engaging content, that the chances of that happening go up. Right. So we're in a heightened risk environment right now. And I think what you need to be working through is, how do you build the bridge to your child to make sure that that has happened? So what our research on talking to young people about exposure to sexual violence in media or online pornography, one of the striking things from our research is they won't talk to their parents about this. They're commonly having experiences where they're disturbed or, are asking some serious questions or, potentially even traumatized. By and large, they will not tell their parents. They might talk to a friend. They might go to some other people. But what we see increasingly from our research is that there's always been a generation gap. But I think that generation gap is acute because, young people in particular are used to having experiences like that, but they're almost habituated not to talk to their parents about it. So you won't even know. So how do you manage an incident that you don't know anything about, or something's off? But so I think the first question is, how do you build a bridge to your child and your young person to make sure that they know it's okay? And in fact, it's normal and expected that they can come to you and talk to you about this stuff, whatever it may be. And that's a trust relationship that you need to start working on right from an early stage in terms of anticipating exactly these events. And it's not one big talk. It's just iterative, kind of normal behavior. And just dropping in opportunities, and every parent will get opportunities to kind of signal this. And the other thing, I guess, is that when this happens, not if but when, manage your own response and emotions, because one of the most normal things for a parent is to be absolutely horrified, particularly with some of the content that's floating around, horrified, shocked, appalled, traumatized yourself. And react in potentially an overblown way. Well, that's one sure way of guaranteeing that your child was never going to come to you again with an issue of this kind. So you've got to manage yourself, you've got to be non-judgmental, and you've got to let them know it's safe and it's okay, and that you're there for them and you're working it through.
Yeah, I hear you, David. All of those things are so important. Just being that approachable parent. When I'm in schools and talking with intermediate age kids, I say to them, how many of you would feel comfortable, telling whoever cares for you at home, if something happens online that's not okay, if something's happened to you, or you see something else happening to someone else, or there's something you see. And it's really interesting. This is in context of a very well-developed conversation I'm having with them. So there's safety in the room at the time, and the responses. And it's really interesting. There's probably about a third of the hands go up and say, no way would I talk to my parents. And 2/3 of that age are like, yeah. And that really aligned with my research and my my thesis around quite higher numbers of that age group and younger are more likely to talk to their parents, and big drop-off comes in high school, obviously. But this third were very clear that, and you just go, oh, and why is that? And immediately, my parent, my mum or my dad or whoever would take my phone off me. They wouldn't trust me. They'd just go off. And it was around that fear of overreaction and losing the device. And so those two things, if we confront that as a parent, and as you say, David, managing our own emotions, first of all, actually, to go back before all of this and think it's not a case of if, more a case of when. So what if we had the conversations in advance, like, hey, if anything happens or you see something, I just really want you to feel like you can come and have a chat. I want you to know that, we're not going to take the device off as the first go-to or anything like that. We'll really work hard not to overreact. We could be shocked or whatever, but we'll work on that. But we really will have your back. We'll be there for you, and we'll just want you to feel you can come and tell us anything, and try and build something beforehand and build that over. And like you say, David, that iterative sort of approach where, if something happens, put your filter up as a parent. I can recall, when my daughter was in year 9, getting into something that she was involved in, and eventually telling us down the track about that. And, it was a real shock. It turned out fine. It was an amazing learning opportunity for her. But to hear, what had happened was, a real surprise and a shock, but fortunately sort of put the filter up first and just put this I'm listening face on, while actually managing a bunch of emotions inside around how should I react, but I'm feeling this, and what should I do? And, just actually paused my own emotions and thought, okay, actually the fact she's telling me is the number one most important, fabulous thing right here and right now. And just working with that lovely expression and honesty of what you've been involved in and seen happening. So really, really important. Build those bridges. We won't always get it right as a parent, so don't let the critic that sits on our shoulder as a parent sometimes beat ourselves up over, the way we might have handled something. We can always come back and say, hey, I didn't handle that so well. It was kind of a bit of a shock. It's all right to come back later. And sometimes we just even need time to think it over. And it's all right to say to our young people, hey, I'm hearing what you're saying, and I'm just trying to get my head around it. It's really big, and I'm just going to take 5 minutes to kind of process this, and then I'll come back and have a chat. So just, giving yourself agency as well. I think, that sort of springs to mind. I did think, with much younger children, I know, David, you were saying about the technological stages of children, when they want to and they can, they're going to find a way. But when they are much younger, there's a reason we put fences around swimming pools. We do that because there are vulnerable people in our communities that haven't got the skills or capabilities yet. And why would we not use the tools and filters and things that are available to use to put on devices in our home and make our homes as safe as possible with what we can work with while they're younger? Bearing in mind that, we can't account for what they might see at someone else's place or a play date here or whatever. But certainly, let's do what we can when we can with the age and stage of our young people as they're coming through.
Thanks, Ange. I'll just pause for a moment and just invite you again, if you have any questions, comments, to the YouTube comments or to the education@netsafe.org.nz. Even if you have a question or a comment that comes to you later, we would certainly love to hear from you. It really helps us in shaping future conversations, because as we all know, we need to be having these conversations in an ongoing way, making them, very much a part of, many conversations we have with our young people, with teachers, between parents. So I think we want to start drilling down, I guess, into looking at one of our other next guiding questions around, practical solutions. And I know, David, there's a wonderful guide that the Classification Office have created around growing up with porn. And what I really liked about it is that there's a wonderful, it's almost like a script that you can follow, or ideas around how do you actually have the conversation. So much of what we're talking about here is just about putting credits in the bank as far as how we communicate with our young people, and really trying to, as David, you say, the bridge. David, did you want to speak a little bit more about that particular resource? We're going to share that in the link with our participants today. It's a fantastic resource that has it talks all about the resource and all about the practical strategies. But David, did you want to speak a little bit more to this?
Yeah, look, absolutely happy to. I'm really proud of that work. I mean, the research that's up on screen now is really the final research report in a series of 3 that we did in this area, because we were just engaging with the issue that, look, once upon a time, as I was saying, in the days of VHS tapes and DVD, pornography was essentially quite closely regulated, and you couldn't buy it if you're a child. You couldn't rent it from a video store, and there were actually some quite real and pragmatic filters in place to keep this sort of material out of the hands of children and younger teens. That doesn't apply anymore, and so we thought to ourselves, I wonder if that's a problem. And we did a national survey of over 2,000 14 to 17-year-olds, and then we did some content survey work looking at what they were looking at. And then that report is basically bringing it all together in some in-depth interviews with young people about what their experience was. And yeah, look, it is a problem, potentially not in the areas that parents might think, but young people are struggling with kind of thinking about what pornography is telling them about what sexual relationships are, and what the expectations of them might be of their peers, who they know also have access to this material. And there's layers and layers of potential issues in there. So one of the things we were thinking through once we completed that work was about what I was saying before, this gap. Yes, young teens and to some extent even children are encountering porn, often unintentionally at first. But they know it's there, and they are exposed to it, and many of them are consuming it for all kinds of reasons, not least being curiosity. But they're not going to talk to their parents about that. Are you kidding me? That is just not going to happen. And that gap is a very real issue, because how do you bridge that? They're still a child, and they still they're still really, whether they know it or not, looking for guidance and the opportunity to kind of engage with this. So thinking about it from a parent's point of view, we thought, well, there's probably few things harder than starting a conversation with your child about pornography and whether they've been exposed to it and kind of what's going on. So, but actually, when you really break it down, it isn't necessarily that hard. So that's why we produce some of the resources on our site to actually demonstrate that in action. Conversation in a car. A car's good because they're kind of trapped. They're not going to jump out, hopefully. And you're not looking at them. You're looking down the road, and there's various situations there that we thought through in terms of how things might work. But it's low key. It's honest. It's real. It's non-judgmental. And it's just, a fairly short way of opening up, really just saying, hey, I'm here for you, and I get it. And again, what we were just talking about, you can come to me and talk to me about this stuff. It's okay. And as I was saying, I think that's one of the critical first steps that so many children and trusted adults in young people's lives, you know, know they might need to do or should do, but really don't know how to go about it. So that's why we came up with some of those resources just to help out with that.
It's fantastic. I just absolutely rate those resources and point many educators and parents to those resources. They're fabulous, they're fun, and they lighten what could be a very difficult, content to talk about. And so, look, just some follow-up from that. I know, one of the key things I like to do is definitely leave educators and whānau with some positives and some go-tos. And so Classification Office, absolutely. Netsafe's got some fabulous resources there on just things when we're thinking around platforms and spaces that young people are on about, heads up what you need to know. A wonderful website, an American website, Common Sense Media. Oh, sorry, yes. So we've got our online safety parent toolkit, and we've got a gaming toolkit as well. These are fantastic resources. So definitely promoting those out there. They're pragmatic, easy, beautifully designed, and that they just, you can at a glance just see some key ideas and tips. So dive onto Netsafe's website and have a look at those. Common Sense Media is an American site that does review a lot of videos, online games, platforms, books, tools, all sorts of things. And they give you a good heads up on what you need to know as a parent from all kinds of considerations as well. And, what age is it most appropriate for? What about privacy? What about this? What about that? And other people also review it, so you get to see other people's ideas around suitability. I'm just thinking too around, just confidence when young people are in these spaces, like getting beside them, seeing what they're doing, chat with them. You don't have to be an online gamer to actually get beside your young person and say, hey, show me what you're doing. You look like you're super in there. Are you winning? How's it going? Oh, no. Just get them to, express and share a little bit about their world, and that can help build a little bit of a bridge. They start to say, oh, yeah, like you're actually interested. But also in those spaces, it gives you a chance then to say, well, hey, what goes on in the chat room there? Like, I hear it can get pretty vile with kind of some of the language. How do you find that? What do you think? Age and stage of your kid. You're not going to talk to your 15-year-old necessarily like that. But, just getting them to talk about their world, their space, and then saying, well, what do you do if something goes wrong or you see something? What's in here? So what about the report button? What about, the delete, the blocking? And we want to empower children and young people to think that they can actually act and do something, and to give them the confidence to do that. Other options for younger children, Google is a pretty interesting beast if we don't have Google Safe Search clicked or ticked in some of the devices in which that's been used. Within a keyword and clicking images or video, a young person can be anywhere. So just thinking younger children, there are other default browsers that they could use that have been designed for children with their safety in mind, such as Swiggle, YouTube Kids, YouTube, there's a restricted mode. I'm just thinking of some of these things that can help at much younger ages and stages of young people. Check the accounts, check who can see your stuff, all of these sorts of pragmatic things that we can do. And the idea of self-regulating is pretty tough. So just building in lovely habits with younger children around, 10 minutes before they need to get off something, 15 minutes, whatever works. Being able to say, hey, in 10 minutes, you're going to need to be hanging up or saying goodbye or getting off. And then they can actually have that mental preparation around, okay, I need to get somewhere safe, or I need to say goodbye. And it can help them, in that whole chemical mix to come down a little bit and get prepared to get off. So there's just some pragmatic thoughts there.
Thank you, Angie. That's great. I just want to circle back to the online parent toolkit as well, because of all those different platforms you said. Of course, there are filters, there are browsers, there are places you can go. But in the online parent toolkit, I really love this resource because it's like putting scaffolding up to any kind of building. that's any kind of platform. It's all about conversation. It's the art of conversation with your children. And I love the idea of one of the steps in the online toolkit is around agree on the agreement. And so many parents I speak to, where we've gifted our children a device, but there's no user manual, no agreement, nothing that's gone with it. And a lot of times with the home learning too, and I think we've all experienced this, everything's been accelerated. I've talked to several parents who've said, I didn't plan on my child being online so soon, but because of home learning, we've actually decided we've needed to jump into the deep end much sooner. So the Online Parent Toolkit is a fantastic resource. The gaming toolkit will give you some great conversation starters around. It's like putting money in the bank, really, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to prevent, you're trying to educate. It's really powerful. So we'll go back to, we have some questions that are coming in. So we're just trying to bring those in at the right time. So actually, in fact, we could probably bring in that comment we talked about a little earlier. We're getting close to the end here, but we'll see if we can address that one. I think it was around what are the best talking points for teachers when parents are allowing children to access inappropriate content, e.g. R18 games, families who would not access Netsafe info or read the literature. Talking points, boy.
Yeah, and I think this is what a lot of teachers do see, and it's a real high concern. It's really tricky. For me personally, I think leaning into the idea that, children's safety has not been factored in to platforms and media where there is an age requirement or restriction. And therefore, their preparedness to manage some of the things that will be in there is really limited, and it can have an impact on them, and we really care about them. And, just thinking around, drawing into values, like from a school perspective, just talking and where you can wrap around, the values that are in school and how, we're looking to really support young people to become critical thinkers, kind, empathetic, caring, to be able to manage, social conflict. A lot of work's happening in school, but some of the media that they're on or that they're seeing or engaging with, is giving them some different messages. And, being able to just sort of talk around that so that, it doesn't become personal between what's happening in your home and your child, but, just lifting it up a layer and talking about how, that messaging can be, that language around what's helpful, what's unhelpful, what's, healthy, what's unhealthy, and drawing that conversation into other things that might be happening at school that promote that safe, well-being, safety, order, social connection that's positive, and lean in on that. And I really recommend at schools that you find a place on your school's newsletter or the forums you use to message to parents, that you find a space that needs pop content in every time that's something to do with this conversation we're having today: online safety, citizenship, values, media, age appropriateness, and just harvest content from Netsafe's website, get links from Classification Office and all of these other places, and pop these things in and just keep messaging out to your community in ways that work.
Absolutely. I think we have, sorry, David, if you were going to respond to that, then we can go to one more comment here. Go for it.
Yeah, look, I was just going to briefly add, with my Chief Censor regulator hat on, I'm bound to point out that in some cases this is going to be unlawful, right?
Yeah.
But that's right at the end of the line in terms of trying to figure out, this is such a good question, it's such a complex question, but I mean, I would say the starting point is the productive way forward is try and figure out what's going on here. You may have a parent that is just struggling, just not coping, and just has no bandwidth to kind of deal with this sort of stuff. That could be going on. That's got one set of kind of interventions and support that you can provide. They might just literally not understand the harm that could be happening to their child because of this. So, okay, if you're on that track, then maybe you can provide them, print them out something, or, give them some of the guidance from Netsafe or from my office that can, and talk them through it. If you can reach an empathetic space where you can have that sort of discussion. But first, you've got to understand what's going on for that parent that's creating this behavior, and how that gives you a direction as to how you can engage, I would say.
Yeah, your context is everything. Yeah, good point, David. That's really, really important.
Absolutely. We do have a comment here from one of our participants. We might just share that really quickly. We're probably going to run a couple minutes over time here, but hopefully you'll stick with us. And this is from Hannah around, discuss issues with safety tips, because kids prefer sharing their adventures with their friends. And I think this is really interesting too, because the way that we've allowed, as David, as you've alluded to, the fact that sometimes we're getting into compliance, we're getting into legal issues at the far end, but that's quite abstract to young people. A lot of young people say to me, I say, well, would you like to have more rules, more like, say, 4 community norms, rules that you would have before you go into Roblox or into a game? And so giving young people that voice to be able to come up with their own community guidelines. One of the tips, talking points that I've had with young people and with some of my own students is like if we're going into and we're gaming with people, and we're gaming with people we don't know necessarily, let's talk about community norms before we start playing. Let's give some of that ownership over to our young people, and they will often have some really good ideas. I think I heard the expression a squeaker, which is somebody who goes onto an online game and screams into the headset. That's a thing apparently. But it's just being able to talk about, when you're online, you're not just this anonymous user that's sitting there behaving in a way that that's quite disruptive and can be quite difficult to deal with. So when we get into the online spaces, just like we do on the netball courts and on the sports fields, we have rules, we have expectations. Let's be much more deliberate about the way we talk about them in those online spaces. So it's a really challenging one, that one, I think, because I think our kids are used to saying, well, my parents are over here, they don't really understand this game I'm doing, so therefore I don't really need to talk about the expectations. But as parents, we have to be able to say, if you want more time online, or more time to be trusted in those spaces, we have to start treating those spaces like they're offline, because we certainly don't want different sets of behaviors. We want to try to make everyone, eventually the words offline and online will probably drop away, I mean, that's probably a whole other webinar in that discussion. So
I just I thought too. Oh, sorry. I thought that's awesome talking, about that whole thing, at that level around conversations with others. And I was just thinking, David, around the work that you've done and in alignment with the Light Project. So they're another organisation, New Zealand-based, fantastic organisation working in the research space and then practical supports for youth and around the topic of pornography. But I was thinking they're one of the lens there on an individual level with a young person team is just critical thinking around the media I'm consuming. We would love young people to develop those skills where they would challenge what they're seeing and what's been shown to them, and align with their own values as they are developing and evolving, and be able to challenge that and say, what do I think about that? Does it align with actually what I lean into? And so their website is also really worth having a look at, and they have developed one for youth in mind, called intheknow.co.nz as well. So there's tremendous supports out there online for teachers, whānau, to have a look at, and those notes will be invaluable from the webinar.
Just before we wrap up, everyone, I just want to draw your attention to yet another resource from Netsafe, the TikTok Family Toolkit. Of course, TikTok is all the rage for some people, some families. And we have a TikTok Family Safety Toolkit that helps you learn, again, putting up some of those guardrails around if this TikTok is incredibly powerful in the way it influences, impacts our young people. It's just part of the vernacular. So we have a family safety toolkit that can support you and your family. If your kids are going into the TikTok world, this is a really handy guide that will help you add some guidance to this journey that you're going to be on, because we know the journey is going to change. Listen, folks, we're running late here, but I just want to remind everybody that just first of all, to thank our guests today, David Shanks, Chief Censor with Classification Office. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and your experience, and the work you do is so vital to the mental health of young people and to all of New Zealanders. So thank you for spending that time with us today. Angie, thank you as well with your hat on and your lens, going out into schools as much as you do with your research, your expertise. Really fantastic to have your voice and have your perspective in this as well. And of course, I just want to acknowledge the team at Netsafe who are behind the scenes, Renee, Eleanor, and Angela, who've been supporting us in the background. Thank you for your support. We will put together a little takeaway resource that will be a summary of some of the points we've discussed today, including all of the links that we've pointed to today as well. That will be coming to you via email. If you are listening in and you did not sign up on Eventbrite, that's okay, but maybe send us an email at education@netsafe.org.nz, and we might just share the Netsafe contact details yet again. If there's something going on, something has gone wrong online, you need some support, you want to talk to somebody about your options, netsafe.org.nz, there's a web form there, there's free text, there's the 0508 number, and of course, if there's something you want to discuss with our education team, which includes Angie, which includes myself and three of our other advisors, we would love to hear from you. education@netsafe.org.nz. Angie, David, any last comments before we sign off?
Great discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Real privilege to be part of this today. And yeah, thanks, David and Andrew and team.
Thanks, everyone. And this will be available up on our Netsafe YouTube channel after today's broadcast, so you can go back, and we will also share some of the links in the description of this video as well. Folks, kia ora. Lovely to have you with us today. Take care, everyone. We'll see you again very soon. Kia ora.
Kia ora.